It's Saturday afternoon, May the 16th, and I don't generally create new podcast episodes on the weekend, but something happened this morning that requires immediate action. This is an emergency episode, and I need you to stick with me for a few minutes and take in every word of it. This is going to seem like a strange place to begin, but I want to go to the 13th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, which contains exactly 27 words in its first section. Listen carefully. I'm going to read them to you directly. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. 27 words, ratified in 1865. The blood of 600,000 Americans paid for those words. Now, notice what's not there. I'm going to read the exception to you. It says, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. The exception is clear, it's limited, and there are things that are missing that some people assume are there. There is no exception for war. There is no national security exception. There is no if recruiting numbers are down exception. And yet the federal government still claims the power to compel a young man who has committed no crime, who's been duly convicted of nothing. He just turned 18. They're going to force him to leave his home, leave his family, leave his job, put on a uniform, pick up a weapon, and risk his life in a war that he didn't vote for, that his representatives didn't vote for, and that he may not believe in. Now that power, it has a name. The polite name in society is conscription. The honest name is the draft. The constitutional, accurate, and originalist name, the word that the founding fathers themselves used, is slavery. Now, this week, 3 days before a congressional primary that has become the most expensive in the history of the United States House of Representatives, a Trump-endorsed candidate from Kentucky went on the record to talk about that word. He said that our adversaries are the happiest people in the world because we don't have a draft anymore. He said that if he were in strategic leadership, which, by the way, he's running for, he would be advocating for the return of the draft. His name is Ed Gallrein, and his primary in Kentucky is this coming Tuesday. And on Monday, the day after tomorrow, the Secretary of War of the United States is flying to Kentucky to make sure that that man wins. Now, let me tell you why, because the timeline and the facts are almost too much to believe.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Edward Gibson Gallrein III, he's a retired United States Navy SEAL captain. He had 30 years in uniform, 4 Bronze Stars. He was on SEAL Team 6, service from Panama to the Persian Gulf. That service, it's real, it's honorable, and nothing in this episode is challenging anything to his legacy of service. I'm also a veteran. I served in Afghanistan, and I will never stand in front of this microphone or anywhere else and disrespect another man's service to our country. But service does not buy a man immunity from his own ideas. Service does not exempt a man from being asked what he believes, and service does not turn a bad idea into a good one. So here is who Ed Gallrein is as a matter of public record. In 2024, he ran for the Kentucky State Senate. He lost his Republican primary by 118 votes. It was very close. 1 year later, on October 17th, 2025, he was summoned to the Oval Office of the White House. President Donald Trump met with him personally. CNN reported on it directly. And the president, who has been publicly furious with Thomas Massie for years, told Gallrein to run in Kentucky against Massie. And 4 days later, on October 21st, Ed Gallrein announced his candidacy for Kentucky's 4th congressional district. That is what the political class calls a recruited candidate. That's what the political elites will call him. But what I'm going to call him is the real word. That man's a plant. Ed Gallrein is an obvious plant. He's been inserted by the administration, who's furious that Thomas Massie has voted his conscience instead of voting the Trump line. Ed Gallrein, he's bankrolled by lobbies whose money has nothing to do with Kentucky and everything to do with Tel Aviv. He's endorsed by every establishment Republican in the state because the establishment wanted to send the same message that it sent to Jamal Bowman in New York 2 years ago. if you cross the establishment, if you cross that lobby, if you cross AIPAC, they will spend whatever it takes to end you politically. Ed, the man, this plant, is being sent in to remove Thomas Massie. Massie is a 7-term congressman. He's a constitutional conservative. He's the last true American congressman in the Republican caucus. He's the man who forced the discharge vote to release the Epstein files against the desires of the Trump administration and against the majority of his own party conference. Once that discharge vote passed, though, every single member of Congress except for one voted in favor of passing the bill. Nobody wanted to be on the wrong side of that one. And it took Thomas Massie, the principled Republican from Kentucky, to get it done. He's the only Republican who has consistently voted against the wars, against unconstitutional foreign aid, against the unconstitutional military strikes, and against the lobby that is now spending the most expensive primary in House history. And they're doing it to take him out. And the proof, the smoking gun, the on tape, on camera, in his own words, proof that Ed Gallrein is exactly the candidate that the machine wants in Massie's seat is in a video clip that I'm about to show you. There's a clip that started circulating on X yesterday. It's a montage of Ed Gallrein on a podcast called USA Cares. He's talking about the all-volunteer military, and he's talking about the draft. The montage is 1 minute and 27 seconds long, and I want you to listen to it carefully. I'm going to play the entire thing.
In 1973, we moved away from conscription selective service and went to the all-volunteer force.
Right.
And so that's been the most challenging few years since that transition, and that is a significant issue for national security. And now back to the question about, well, selective service and the attitudes about it. I would offer there is a cultural issue, and that it does appear we have a corrosion of our culture and the commitment to what our nation stands for. If you figure, we got to start selective service, we got to get them through all the in-processing, boot camp, training, you're talking months downstream. Do we really have that time anymore?
No.
Is that a deeply flawed concept?
Yeah.
And so what would really happen if we had to go from what I call a cold start of a pending, world war? How fast, and what would really happen if we had to re-implement selective service, i.e. the draft, train, equip, and prepare to deploy those forces? I'm not sure we have that kind of time anymore.
Right.
Because of speed and lethality. We want to stay in deterrence. I'm not so sure that we're on as high ground in deterrence as we could be with sort of the way things are unfolding relative to our ability to field combat power.
Yeah.
And so the selective service to draft pertain.
Now, listen to what just happened. He said that ending the draft in 1973 has been, and I quote, a significant issue for national security. He said relying on an all-volunteer force, and I quote again, a deeply flawed concept. He said we may not have time to do the draft slowly anymore. We need to be ready to move faster. That is a retired Navy SEAL captain recorded telling the American people that the U.S. government should be preparing to conscript American sons faster than we can currently recruit them. But here's the thing about the montage. There's a line that was missing. I was shocked when I went and found the full clip, the full podcast episode, watched it all, and there was a line that was missing. A line that didn't make the X clip, the montage that we just played. A line that, in the moment you hear it, tells you everything that you need to know about which side of the constitutional question Ed Gallrein is on. It's about 25 seconds long, and I'm going to play it for you right now. Please listen.
And so the happiest people in the world were our more what you call larger nation state adversaries
Right.
at the time, and of course the ones now, because we moved away from the draft and selective service where we'd have a force in standing.
Hear that? The happiest people in the world. Let that play in the back of your head. The happiest people in the world were our adversaries when we ended conscription. The Russians, the North Koreans, the Chinese, the Iranians, the regimes whose government model, coercive, conscriptive, anti-individual, is the model the American founders rejected by force of arms. And Ed Gallrein, a retired Navy SEAL captain, he's Trump-endorsed congressional candidate, looks at the regimes that conscript their own citizens and says that they are the happy ones. He looks at the United States, which abolished its draft and built a volunteer force of free men, and he says that we are the ones at a strategic disadvantage. That's actually the inversion. That's the moral tell. That's the entire interview boiled down to one line, and it was left out of that clip, and I don't know why. And later, in the same interview, and the full transcript is going to be in the description of this episode. It's going to be available for you to look at. Captain Gallrein says, and these are his exact words, if I was back as Commodore Gallrein or Captain Gallrein at a strategic leadership position, I'd be advocating that we do a war game and factor that in. He's talking about the draft. Listen to the words that he used. Advocating, not contemplating, not considering, not exploring contingencies. Advocating. And in military language, advocating means lobbying for, pushing for, recommending up the chain of command. Ed Gallrein is, if he were in uniform today, would be advocating to plan the return of the American draft. But he doesn't have a uniform on anymore. But on Tuesday, Kentucky might give him something even more powerful than the uniform. Let's go back to those 27 words that I opened the episode with. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States. The amendment has one exception: punishment for crime after conviction. Conscription is not a punishment for a crime. The young man who turns 18 and is forced to register for the selective service has been convicted of nothing. The young man whose number is drawn in a draft lottery has done nothing wrong. But he is being compelled, under threat of federal prosecution and federal prison, to give his body, his labor, and his life to a government decision he had no part in making. That, my friends, is the textbook definition of involuntary servitude. The Supreme Court, though, it has ruled on this question once in our history. Once. The case was decided in 1918. What was going on at that time? Oh, yeah, it was during World War I. The court unanimously upheld the draft. The court said that conscription is not, and I quote, involuntary servitude because military service is a duty that citizens owe the state. A duty that citizens owe the state. That is not the language of the Constitution. That is not the language of free men. That is the language of a subject explaining his relationship to a king. The Constitution does not say that a citizen owes his duty of military service to the state. The Constitution says that Congress has the power to raise and support armies. Now, there's a difference between raising an army by hiring volunteers and raising one by force. Constitutional scholars across the political spectrum, left, right, center, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, all of them, they've criticized that 1908 decision, that ruling, for over a century. Some call it a fig leaf that the court was giving the executive branch a gift. Originalists have called it an invented exception. But the precedent, it stands. The precedent is the only thing standing between an American boy and the modern equivalent of the British press gang. The man, Ed Gallrein, wants to replace Thomas Massie is precisely the kind of constitutional originalist who has questioned that precedent for years. The man that Ed Gallrein wants to be is the man who wants to lean into the draft. Most of America has forgotten that the founders did not need the 13th Amendment to know what conscription was. They knew. And the most eloquent man of the early republic told them in plain English what it was. And I'm talking about December 9th, 1814, 2.5 years into the War of 1812. The British had just burned Washington. President Madison, his Secretary of War, proposed a draft, a conscription. There was a bill to fill the ranks of the regular army by force, taking American men against their will. A young congressman from New Hampshire, he stood up in the House of Representatives and he delivered one of the most devastating speeches against government overreach in American history. His name was Daniel Webster. He would later become a senator. He was later then a 2-time Secretary of State. He's one of the most revered conservative statesmen of the 19th century. Here's what Webster said about the proposed draft. The language, the words that I'm about to quote are his. He said the bill had no foundation in the Constitution. He called it, quote, an abominable doctrine. He asked, and this is the question that I want every voter in Kentucky's 4th district to sit with this weekend. He asked, where in the Constitution is it written that you may take a children from their parents and parents from their children to compel them to fight the battles of any war in which the folly or the wickedness of government may engage it? Read those words again, the folly or the wickedness. Webster understood that government does not always go to war for righteous reasons. Sometimes governments go to war out of stupidity, sometimes for bad intelligence, sometimes out of corruption, and sometimes because foreign interests have purchased the men making the decisions. That's the question that Webster put on the table in 1814. That's the question Ed Gallrein cannot answer in 2026. Where in the Constitution does it say that a free man's body belongs to the state in time of war? Webster said the Constitution would be libeled, foully libeled by the proposal. He said the American people had not purchased their Magna Carta of liberty at the vast expense of their own treasure and their own blood, only to be slaves. Slaves. That's the word that Webster used in 1814, 50 years before the 13th Amendment was ratified. A founding era statesman on the floor of the United States House of Representatives told his own government that conscription, the draft, was slavery. That bill, it died in committee. The Republic survived the War of 1812 without a draft. Ed Gallrein, 2 centuries later, looks at the history and he sees a problem with it. In that same interview that we referenced earlier, Gallrein, he walks through his own theory of why the United States ended the draft in 1973. And his theory is this.
One other thing, and because of the media, the information, be it disinformation or other, spreads so fast and changes sentiment. Now, I want to go back to something that's very important. Why did we go away from the draft and selective service? And again, I'll fill in the blank here. It won't be a question for y'all. But you might recall in Vietnam, the U.S. populace became very disenchanted.
Yes.
What turned the page in the Vietnam War? This is a test question. All right.
What turned the page to make us decide that we needed to go a different direction?
We're going to get out, change the politics of the nation, and ultimately we moved away from selective service. What was
it became politically unpopular.
Why? What is it the adversary did? I'm going to give you a teaser. They did something, an operation. It was called the what offensive? A Tet offensive. Bingo. They were decimated.
Yeah.
They were tactically defeated soundly.
Yeah.
They were the adversary.
Okay.
The Viet Cong in the North, we destroyed them.
Okay.
But what did we lose? We lost the information operation on the streets of America.
Yeah.
The U.S. public became disenchanted with the war.
Mm-hmm.
And look how that changed.
The Tet Offensive of 1968 was a tactical defeat for the Viet Cong. He is absolutely right about that. The American military destroyed them on the battlefield. But he says, and this is his framing, quote, we lost the information operation on the streets of America. He says that the American public became disenchanted with the war. He says that disenchantment ended the draft. Listen to those verbs. We lost. He's mourning a loss. The loss that he's mourning is the loss of American government's ability to keep sending young men into war the American people had decided was no longer worth fighting. I want to be very clear about what just happened in his framing. He's saying that the political pressure created by the draft, the pressure that ended the war, the political and military class wanted to keep fighting, was a defeat for America. That's exactly backwards. The American people, given enough skin in the game, stopped the war that should never have been fought. That was the system working. That was the constitutional self-government doing what it's supposed to do. That was a free citizen telling their government no more. But to Ed Gallrein, that is a loss of the information operation. To the Constitution, that is the consent of the governed reasserting itself against the government that had stopped listening to it. The only reason the political and military class wants the draft back is because they have lost the ability to fight the wars that they want with the soldiers that we have. The all-volunteer force is the firewall the American people built between themselves and the next undeclared forever war. But when the war is just, the volunteers, they come. When the war is unjust, the volunteers, they stop showing up. That's how the system is supposed to work. And Ed Gallrein wants to remove that feature from the system. And the people paying for his campaign, the people sending the Secretary of War to Kentucky on Monday, they want that feature gone for a very specific reason. Now, I want to tell you what happened this week that's got my blood so boiled. This didn't happen last year. This didn't happen last month. It happened this week. Because I think if you understand what happened in the 7 days in May of 2026 that I'm about to talk about, you understand everything about why this race matters and who is on which side. Let's start on Wednesday, May 14th, 2026. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce of all entities fast tracks an endorsement of Ed Gallrein. 2 stops, Florence, Kentucky, Simpsonville, Kentucky. National Corporate America publicly signs on with the plant as their candidate of choice. It's a big endorsement. On Thursday, May 15th, 2026, Thomas Massie introduces in the United States House of Representatives a bill called Americans Insist on Political Agency Clarity Act, abbreviated AIPAC Act. Brilliant. The bill would require lobbyists for AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, to register as foreign agents under federal law. The same law that applies to lobbyists working for Russia, the same law that applies to lobbyists working for China, the same law that every other foreign aligned lobby in Washington is required to follow. On Friday, May 16th, yesterday, a text response only poll comes out. The race is tightening. Gallrein is up all of a sudden, 48-43. Later in the day, another more reputable poll comes out using real reputable polling practices, and it shows Massie is back up by 7. The machine, they see the polls. The machine moves. And today, May 16th, Republican Congresswoman and ultra MAGA Trump enthusiast Lauren Boebert is campaigning with Congressman Massie. Within hours of their campaign stops, Trump releases a Truth Social post seeking any candidate to run against Boebert for betraying Trump and renewing his unhinged criticism of Massie, calling him, and I quote, the worst Republican in history. Now, on Monday, just the day after tomorrow, May 18th, 2026, the Secretary of War of the United States of America, Pete Hegseth, will board an airplane and fly to Hebron, Kentucky. He'll arrive at a venue in northern Kentucky at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and he will be there for one purpose: to campaign for Ed Gallrein on the eve of the primary election. Then on Tuesday, May 19th, 2026, the polls will open. Look at that timeline. Look at it and tell me you don't see the hand on the puppet strings. Thomas Massie himself, a sitting United States congressman from Kentucky, has a name for the men who are pulling those strings. In a public post on X earlier this month, Massie called them, and I'm quoting the congressman directly, billionaire puppet masters. Now, damn it, those are Massie's words. I wish they were mine originally, but for now, I'll continue to give credit to Thomas, and I'll continue following his lead and using them because they are accurate. Massie also said on the Tucker Carlson show that at least 95% of the money funding the campaign against him is coming from the pro-Israel lobbying groups. 95%. Let me run you through those numbers. The Republican Jewish coalition has spent approximately $4 million to defeat Thomas Massie. AIPAC's super PAC, the United Democracy Project, has spent another $2.6 million, plus another $790,000 in a single week of broadcast advertising in Cincinnati, Louisville, and Charleston media markets. Christians United for Israel has poured in 6 figures into billboards across the 4th District. The total of the pro-Israel lobby spending against Thomas Massie is somewhere between $5.7 and $9.8 million, depending on which independent reporting source you trust. The total spend in the race is over $25.6 million, breaking the record that AIPAC set itself in 2024, spending $14.5 million to take out Jamal Bowman, who we talked about earlier in this episode. Now, this has become the most expensive primary in the history of the United States House of Representatives. And one day after the sitting congressman tried to force the men spending that money to register as who they are, foreign agents, the Secretary of War is being put on an airplane, fly to Kentucky to make sure that their boy comes across the finish line victorious. Now, I'm going to take a moment and ask the obvious question that every American watching this episode should be asking. What in the holy hell is the Secretary of War of the United States doing campaigning for a congressional candidate in a Republican primary in Kentucky on the day before the polls open? Let me tell you what's so unusual about that. It's extraordinarily rare, historically, institutionally, and constitutionally, for a Secretary of Defense or a Secretary of War or any senior cabinet official with responsibility for men and women in uniform to involve themselves in a partisan primary election of his own party for a sitting incumbent seat against that incumbent while the country is at war. Cabinet secretaries used to understand that the uniform they oversaw represented every American, Republicans, Democrats, independents, and that to involve their office in a partisan primary was to corrupt the apolitical character of the military itself. That is why secretaries of defense going back generations have stayed out of primary campaigns. That is why even the most partisan administrations have generally kept their war secretaries away from cameras at political rallies. Pete Hegseth is breaking the norm publicly, visibly, 24 hours before a primary. That's not just bad form. It may actually be against the law. Let me explain. There's a federal statute called the Hatch Act. It was passed in 1939, and its purpose is one sentence long: to prevent federal employees from using the power of their official position to influence the outcome of an election. That's it. That's the Hatch Act. The Hatch Act applies to nearly every single civilian employee of the federal executive branch, including explicitly Senate-confirmed cabinet officers like the Secretary of War. The only two officials in the executive branch who are exempt from the Hatch Act are the President of the United States and the Vice President. Pete Hegseth is not the President. Pete Hegseth is not the Vice President. Pete Hegseth is covered by the Hatch Act. And this is not a theoretical question that hasn't been challenged. In 2012, Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius was found by the Office of Special Counsel to have violated the Hatch Act for making partisan campaign remarks at an official event. Fast forward to 2016. You probably remember this. Housing and Urban Development Secretary Julian Castro was found to have violated the Hatch Act for endorsing a candidate during a media interview. And in 2024, just 2 years ago, Secretary of the Navy Carlos Del Toro was found to have violated the Hatch Act for endorsing Joe Biden during an official trip to London. These are documented on the record cabinet-level Hatch Act violations within my recent memory. When the Secretary of the War of the United States, using the honorific that derives from his official office, travels to an event publicly billed under his official title, campaigns for a partisan congressional candidate on the eve of the primary, the Office of Special Counsel, Pete, they're going to come knocking and they're going to have some very difficult questions. I need you to listen to me. Pete, brother, you may be violating the Hatch Act on Monday, on camera, with the entire country watching. And this is the part, Pete, that makes my blood boil as a veteran. And I know you hear me. This is the part I also want every man and woman who's ever worn the uniform, and every father and mother of a man or woman who's in uniform right now, hear me out. While Pete is flying to Kentucky to campaign for Ed Gallrein, who wants a draft, there are United States carrier strike groups in the Middle East. Carrier Strike Group 10, which arrived in the CENTCOM area of responsibility on April 23rd. This is the largest American military buildup in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. There's 15,000 service members deployed under Project Freedom, which is Pete's own operation to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. There's over 10,000 additional U.S. personnel who are enforcing the naval blockade of Iran that this administration imposed on April 13th. The 82nd Airborne is in the region. 2,500 Marines were redirected from the Pacific. There's F-35s and F-22s and F-15s and ballistic missile defense destroyers and AH-64 Apache gunships, A-10 Thunderbolts, MV-22 Ospreys. Every major component of the United States military is in or around Iran right now. There are 20 states whose National Guard troops have been forced into federal service and are now in the region participating in this undeclared war against Iran. And in the last 24 hours alone, Iran has launched cruise missiles, drones, and weaponized small boats against U.S. warships and commercial vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. I'm not talking about 2003. I'm not talking about some hypothetical situation in the future. I'm talking about today. That's the war, Pete, that you're supposed to be prosecuting. Those young men and women are not abstractions. They are the sons. They are our daughters. They are tripwires positioned in some of the most dangerous waters in the world with cruise missiles flying at them because the same men who are paying for Ed Gallrein's campaign got us, got you, got me, got this administration to go to war with Iran in the first place. Those service members deserve a Secretary of the War who's in the Pentagon or at CENTCOM or in the Situation Room or talking to commanders on the ground or talking to the families of the dead, because there are dead and there will be more. And there are already Americans who are wounded, hundreds. You should be talking to their sons and their daughters and their families and talking to the people who are actually in harm's way at the behest of a foreign government. They don't deserve a Secretary of War, Pete, who's in Kentucky at 1 p.m. on a Monday on a stage with Ashley Hayek of the America First Policy Institute, who so desperately wants to be wanted by the Trump administration, and Ed Gallrein helping the three heels of the Israeli billionaire donor class collect a scalp in a Republican primary. Pete, if you were still in the uniform, and you would call it what I'm going to call it, dereliction of duty. You're a constitutional officer of the United States, sworn to oversee the most lethal military in the history of the world, abandoning your post, abandoning the troops that you are responsible for. You're doing it to do the political field work of the same lobby that put those troops in harm's way in the first place. Pete, I'm talking to you again directly. You may not remember this. I'll bet you do, though. Your fifth general order, of which you are still sworn to uphold, is to quit my post only when properly relieved. Every private knows that general order. Every sergeant of the guard knows this order. Every commander of the guard, who is typically a very young commissioned officer like a first or a second lieutenant, they know it. It's ingrained into our involuntary response mechanism. You don't abandon your post. And Pete, your post is to be prosecuting the war that the people who summoned you to Kentucky forced on our nation. I want to be very precise with my language here. The Israeli donor class, and that's a descriptive. Okay? It's not a derogatory. AIPAC and the Republican Jewish Coalition and Christians United for Israel are, by their own self-description, organizations dedicated to supporting the state of Israel. The Israeli donor class spent $10 million to take out Thomas Massie. The same Israeli donor class lobbied this administration to launch strikes on Iran that began Operation Epic Fury on February 28th. The same Israeli donor class produced and amplified the Iran is 2 weeks from a nuclear weapon claim that Joe Kent has exposed as complete fabrication. The same Israeli donor class is now collecting on the political debts that those decisions created. And the day after Thomas Massie tried to force them to register as a foreign agent, that donor class summoned the good boy, the current Secretary of War of the United States, to go to Kentucky to rescue their plant. It's not an innuendo, Pete. It's just the timeline. That's the public spending. You can look it all up. That's the Hegseth event on a publicly announced flyer. That's the Tuesday primary. That's the problem with the Hatch Act violations. That is the Pentagon that Pete is supposed to be running. The war that he's supposed to be leading. The war that none of us wanted. Secretary of War of the United States, a man who, when he was on Fox News as a host, made a career talking about ending the endless wars, is being deployed by the same lobby that wants the endless wars to continue. against the only Republican in Congress who has consistently voted to end them, while American troops he's responsible for are taking cruise missiles in the Persian Gulf. Pete, you know what you're doing. You know where that money came from. You know the timing. You know what it looks like. You know that the troops are in harm's way, but you're going anyway. It's the system that we've been warning you about and that Joe Kent told us all about. The same machinery, the same playbook, the same captured men in a different state, in a different season, with a different rescue mission. And the boy they're flying in to rescue is who said on tape that we should be wargaming the return of the draft. Now ask yourself one more time, why do they need him so badly? Now I'm going to put two facts side by side. Fact number one, military recruiting has been in crisis. Gallrein himself cites the data in the same interview that we showed you earlier. In 2023, only the Marine Corps and the Space Force met their active duty enlisted recruiting goals. The Army, the Navy, and the Air Force fell short by thousands. Only about 1 in 4 young Americans is even eligible to serve without a waiver. Fact number two, in the last 2 years, the United States has fought a 12-day war with Iran. They've launched strikes inside of Iranian territory. They've invaded a country in our own hemisphere and captured their leader. They've conducted naval operations in the Persian Gulf. They've sent a carrier group out for 345 days straight. They've conducted strikes in Yemen. They've fought on 3 sides of the same conflict in Syria before ultimately crowning al-Qaeda as the new leader in Syria. Continued military support for the war in Ukraine. We've entered a new conflict in Iran in February of this year. We codenamed it by the administration Operation Epic Fury. Now put those two facts side by side, right next to each other. The American government is fighting wars on a scale that requires more soldiers, more warm bodies than the American people are willing to provide voluntarily. The system is breaking. Recruitment has been collapsing because the American people, with the most access to information in human history, they can see it clearly now, in real time. These wars are not in our national interest. We can see who profits from them. We can see who pays. And they're voting with their feet. Their sons and daughters are just not signing up. So the machine has 2 choices: stop fighting wars that Americans don't want, or force Americans to fight them. Guess which choice they're quietly preparing for? Ed Gallrein said it out loud that he'd be advocating that we do a war game to reinstitute the draft. That's the choice that the machine has made. More bodies for the meat grinder. And Ed Gallrein is the man that they have selected to introduce it and vote for it when that time comes. A Congress full of Ed Gallreins is a Congress that, when the next manufactured crisis arrives, when the next imminent threat is invented in Tel Aviv conference rooms, transmitted through Witkoff, and repeated by a president, will not blink before reaching into your home and into your family and into the lives of your children. A Congress with Thomas Massie in it asks the question, is this war just, and is it in America's interest? A Congress with Ed Gallrein in it, it pulls the trigger and snatches up your children. This is where Bring Our Troops Home and the Defend the Guard movement come in. There's 2 questions every American needs to be asking right now. What do we do if Washington starts the next war without a declaration of war from Congress? And what do we do if Washington tries to reach into our homes and into our states and fill its ranks by the way of force? The federal Constitution gives Congress, not the president, not the Pentagon, not AIPAC, the power to declare war. Article 1, Section 8. That's the first firewall. But the federal Constitution also gives the state a specific role in the National Guard. Under Title 10 of the United States Code, Section 12301, Paragraph A, the Guard cannot be deployed into federal active duty for foreign war unless Congress has declared war. That's the second firewall. Defend the Guard legislation, which is now active in dozens of state legislatures, codifies that constitutional principle into state law. It says if Congress has not declared war, the governor will not release the state's guard. The most basic and most constitutional and most state sovereign answer to an unaccountable Washington that any state legislature could possibly pass. And it's the answer to the Ed Gallrein problem, should he win. Because even if the federal government decides that the wars it wants to fight require conscripting your sons and daughters, your state still will have tools. Your state will hold constitutional ground. I want you to visit defendtheguard.us and find out where your state is in the fight. In Kentucky, we have Defend the Guard bill sponsors and champions in the legislature. They are fantastic. Congressman Massie and Senator Rand Paul, both from Kentucky, have endorsed the Defend the Guard legislation. If your state legislator hasn't introduced the bill yet, ask them why. And if they have, ask them when there will be a hearing and what you can do to support their efforts. The federal firewall is falling in real time. The state firewall is a backstop. Let me leave you with the simplest version of what we just walked through. Ed Gallrein's on tape saying that our adversaries are happy that we don't draft American sons. He's on tape saying that he would advocate to wargame the draft's return. He's on tape framing the end of the draft after Vietnam as a national loss instead of a national triumph. Donald Trump endorsed him. Pete Hegseth is flying to Kentucky on Monday to rescue him. AIPAC, the Republican Jewish Coalition, and the Christians United for Israel have spent $10 million to put him in Congress. The same week, Thomas Massie introduced a bill to make AIPAC register as a foreign agent. The man Ed Gallrein wants to replace voted against the Iran strikes. He voted against the endless wars. He voted to bring our service members home. And as of yesterday, he tried to expose the foreign lobby that is now spending millions to remove him. That's the choice on Tuesday in Kentucky's 4th District. It's not a choice between two Republicans. It's a choice between a constitution and the influence of a foreign lobby. It's a choice between an all-volunteer military and a forced draft. It's a choice between the 13th Amendment and the admonition that Daniel Webster warned us about in 1814. And right now, every American watching this episode has exactly one job for the next 72 hours. I need you to go to MassieMoneyBomb.com. That is MassieMoneyBomb.com. Massie's already raised more than $2,481,000 through this money bomb. And every single one of those dollars came from a small dollar grassroots American, from Kentucky farmers, from veterans, from constitutional conservatives in all 50 states who believe that Thomas Massie is the last great American congressman. That money is the answer to the Israeli billionaire donor class that has spent $10 million trying to take him out. That money is what real grassroots American politics looks like when it pushes back against the powerful foreign lobby. $25, $50, whatever you can give from real Americans multiplied by tens of thousands of them. This is not just a normal political donation. This is a vote against the lobby. This is a vote for the Constitution. This is a vote against the draft that they are quietly preparing to bring back. And the goal here is not to hit some number on a fundraising tracker. The goal is to win the damn election on Tuesday night. Every dollar you put in between right now and Monday night is a dollar that Thomas Massie can use to fight back in the final 72 hours against the $10 million in foreign lobby attack ads. Every dollar is a thumb in the eye of the billionaire puppet masters who think that Kentucky is for sale in a place where the foreign lobby gets to play for fun. 3 actions, once again, that I need you to follow. Number 1, MassieMoneyBomb.com. Donate by Monday night, $25, whatever you can. Every dollar goes to put Massie back in Congress. Number 2, if you're in Kentucky's 4th District, vote on Tuesday, May 19th. Vote for Massie. Tell your neighbors, tell your friends, bring your veteran friends, tell everybody at church, drag them with you to the polls. Kentucky's 4th Congressional District has to show up, and the polls already show that Massie has overwhelming support in the demographics 65 years old and lower. Number 3, for everybody else, go to defendtheguard.us, find your state, find your legislator, get in the fight in your state, and chip in a few bucks by clicking donate at the Defend the Guard website. The 13th Amendment is 27 words long. The Israeli donor class spent $10 million to take out the one man in the Republican caucus who might have actually read it. They put Ed Gallrein on the ballot, putting Pete Hegseth on a plane. We have 72 hours and one website, MassieMoneyBomb.com, to make it stop. for the Constitution, for our republic, for the boys who would be drafted into the next war that they pick. Let's bring our troops home. Thanks for watching.